Spoštovane koleginice iz Beograda, Skopja, Zagreba, dobro nam došle v Ljubljani. Lepo pozdravljeni, pozdravljene na Dnevih enakosti spolov. Letos lahko, kot vsa pretekla leta, rečemo, da so že tradicionalni in že četrtič, ki jih otvarjamo v naši ekipi. Ker se temu vodstvu mandat izteka, bi lahko pogledali bilanco. Dnevi enakosti spolov so dobili stroškovno mesto, kar zagotavlja njihovo trajno financiranje v okviru fakultete, za kar se lahko zahvalimo prodekanjama za kakovost Mojci Smolej in prodekani za finance Ireni Samide. Univerza v Ljubljani se je z dokumentom Načrt enakosti spolov 2022-2027 in akcijskim načrtom dodatno zavezala k uveljavljanju načel enakosti spolov. Tam med drugim piše, da na Univerzi v Ljubljani skrbimo, da smo vodilna družbena sila pri ozaveščanju, zagotavljanju in promoviranju načel enakosti in vključevanja v izobraževanju, raziskovanju in širšem družbenem okolju. Zato je zagotovo zaslužna tudi naša fakulteta. Zato bi se najprej zahvalila gonilni sili Dnevov enakosti spolov na naši fakulteti, profesorici Milici Antić Gaber in njenim sodelavcem in sodelavkam, Jasni Podreka in Romanu Kuharju, ter še drugim, tudi študentom z oddelka za sociologijo, ki so letos pomagali pri organizaciji. Po odmevnem evropskem projektu Gear in Rose jih podpiramo v zavzemanju, da bi zavedanje o enakosti spolov še naprej prodirala vse pore družbe. Zakaj je treba to kar naprej ponavljati? Z nami so kolegice iz naše nekdanje skupne zgodovine in če pogledamo nazaj, so bile v Jugoslaviji pravice žensk zagotovljene na vseh področjih. Pravica do splava je bila zapisana v ustavo leta 1974 in žal je treba to zdaj ponovno ponavljati in ozaveščati. To, da pravice težko pridobljene niso zagotovljene zavedno, spoznavamo na vsakem koraku. Na Filozofski fakulteti nam je dobro. Tu živimo v mehurčku, saj se ukvarjamo z mladimi, ki jim prodajamo svoje prepričanje in svoje sanje in mladi so zato dovzetni, kar potrjuje tudi njihovo vključenost v pripravo letošnjega desa. Zunaj je svet zelo drugačen. Težko razumem, kako lahko vložki na moškem stranišču Filozofske fakultete prinesejo več objav v medijih kot vsi drugi dogodki na Filozofski fakulteti. Ampak tovrstni napadi so dejstvo. Je to strah pred spremembo, strah pred žensko ali samo senzacionalizem, da preženemo dolgčas in da se nam ni treba soočiti z realnostjo. Če pogledamo v svet, nam gre precej slabo. Občutek, da se delimo na dva svetova, levega in desnega, močno zaposluje ljudi in jih ideološko opredeljuje. In lahko se vprašamo, ali je morda tudi ta občutek lažno ustvarjen, saj ves ta čas neoliberalni kapitalizem brezkompromisno uničuje svet in s tem največ izgublja humanistika. Pa vendar na vprašanja o človeku v družbi odgovarja predvsem humanistika z družboslovjem. No, zaenkrat se na Filozofski fakulteti temu upiramo in smo ponosni, da lahko napovemo prvi dogodek letošnjih Dnevov enakosti spolov, ki bodo trajali do 26.3. To je Okrogla miza Prihodnost akademskih študijev spola, na katerem bodo spregovorile gostje, predavateljice in raziskovalke tega interdisciplinarnega področja iz Beograda, Zagreba, Skopja in Ljubljane, dr. Branka Galić, dr. Isidora Jarić, dr. Biljana Kotevska, dr. Perger in dr. Milica Antić Gaber. In okroglo mizo bo moderiral dr. Roman Kuhar. Drage koleginice iz Beograda, Zagreba in Skopja, dobro nam došli. Mi smo nekada zajedno učili o bratstvu i jedinstvu, a što nam ostaje, to je solidarnost među ženama. In najprej zaključim, upozorim še na dve razstavi, ki sta trenutno na Filozofski fakulteti. V galeriji 5. štuk razstavlja kolegica Vanda Vremšak, V pritličju pa si lahko ogledate razstavo o Ingeborg Bachmann, o Vesta ženski.
Jaz pa bom malo bolj osebna in sicer bi rada najprej omenila, da je na začetku letošnjega leta Pošta Slovenije v zbirki slovenske ustvarjalke izdala znamko Minke Skabrne. To dejanje me je kar razveselilo in sicer zato, ker gre za praprateto moje najstniške hčerke, seveda tudi sinov. No in Minka Skabrne je v nasprotju s svojimi 3 brati, ki so študirali na Dunajski univerzi, sama lahko izbrala le poklic učiteljice. Zdaj, med drugim se je seveda uveljavila tudi s prepisovanjem literarnih del, naprimer Cankarjevih del, v Brajlovo pisavo, in zato je tudi knjižnica slepih in slabovidnih v Ljubljani poimenovana po njej. Ampak, če se je morala Minka Skabrne zato, da je lahko opravljala poklic učiteljice, odpovedati zasebnemu, družinskemu življenju in še marsičemu drugemu, ima 125 let pozneje njena prapravnečakinja odprte vse možnosti za študij in skoraj, zdaj poudarek je na skoraj, ni ovire na njeni življenjski poti, kar je zagotovo tudi zasluga njene prednice. Rekla sem, da skoraj ni ovire za prapravnečakinjo Minke Skabrne. Da je ta beseda skoraj na mestu, torej izrečena povsem upravičeno, pričajo tudi vsi dogodki, ki se bodo odvili v okviru des. Iskreno upam, da bodo tako nes kot des pripomogli, da bo beseda skoraj le še preteklost. Da smo na dobri poti, kažejo tudi nekatere številke. 12. februarja, torej prejšnji mesec, je minilo 60 let od smrti Alme Sodnik, prve docentke, prve izredne in prve redne profesorice in tudi prve dekanje Filozofske fakultete. Od temi smrti, torej 60 let nazaj, je imela naša fakulteta samo eno docentko in samo eno izredno profesorico. Danes ima naša fakulteta 83 rednih profesoric, 38 izrednih profesoric in 55 docentk. Za konec bi se tudi jaz rada zahvalila idejni vodji, organizatorici des, profesorici doktorici Milici Antić Gaber, ki med drugim ves čas opozarja prav na to, da beseda skoraj, žal, še vedno obstaja. Najlepša hvala.
Hvala lepa, Milica. Hvala lepa tudi za ta čudovit uvod. Glede na to, da smo do zdaj slišali že, mislim, da 4 jezike, slovenskega, hrvaškega, srbskega, španskega, na manj samo še ena in ta je angliščina. So I will switch to English because this roundtable will take place in English. Also because there are some Erasmus students among us and I did promise that it's going to be in English, so they are okay with understanding what we are going to say. So the introductory roundtable for this year's Days of Gender Equality at the Faculty of Arts, University of Ljubljana is, as already mentioned, dedicated to the state of gender studies in our region, more specifically in the post-Yugoslav space. We will explore the different paths through which gender studies found their way into academia and the challenges these studies have faced along the way. It is a fact that gender studies have always encountered overt or covert resistance as they question fundamental power structures in our society. In the past decade, this resistance has evolved into a strong political mobilization against so-called gender ideology, knowledge production, particularly in gender studies, but also more broadly in social sciences, has become one of the main targets of this mobilization. We have witnessed the closure of gender studies departments in Hungary, attacks on gender scholars in other countries, and more recently, executive orders dictating how gender and gender relations should be understood. These developments provide important starting points for our discussion today. Let me now briefly introduce our distinguished guests from Croatia, Serbia, North Macedonia, and of course Slovenia. Isidora Jarić is a sociologist and full professor at the Department of Sociology, Faculty of Philozofski, University of Belgrade in Serbia. Her research focuses on education, gender, and health, particularly concerning marginalized groups. She has edited and co-edited several academic volumes on higher education reform, populism, and politics of parenthood. Additionally, she is the author of multiple books on curricula, gender equality in education, and the risks of parenthood. Branka Galić is a sociologist and full professor at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, University of Zagreb. She introduced several courses on gender studies, feminist theories, and women's movements at various academic levels in Croatia. She leads the Women and Society section of the Croatian Sociological Society and has been involved in research projects on gender discrimination, sexual violence, and reproductive rights. Her work explores gender relations, patriarchy, and feminist critiques of institutions. Biljana Kotevska is a socio-legal feminist researcher and Max Weber Fellow at the European University Institute in Italy. She holds a PhD in law from Queen's University Belfast, focusing on intersectional inequalities in the post-Yugoslav space. Her current research examines the legal history of human rights institutions and political participation in the region. She has also worked in policy making in Macedonia, or North Macedonia, I should say, contributing to gender equality laws and Roma women's rights initiatives. Milica Antić Gaber is a sociologist and full professor at the Department of Sociology at this faculty, University of Ljubljani, where she coordinates the doctoral program in gender studies. Her research focuses on feminist political theory, women in politics, gender and globalization, violence and migration. She has led and participated in numerous national and international projects on gender equality and played a key role in adopting gender equality plan at the Faculty of Arts, University of Ljubljana. Currently, she is a board member of the European Sociological Association. And finally, Nina Perger is a researcher and lecturer at the Faculty of Social Sciences, University of Ljubljana. Her research focuses on gender, sexuality, queer theory, and social movements, with particular attention to non-normative identities and experiences. She has been involved in national and international research projects on LGBTQ+ rights, gender and sexual diversity, discrimination and social inclusion. Her publications include articles and books on queer identities, feminist theory, and the politics of sexuality. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and yet again, welcome to Ljubljana. I know that I said it before. In the first round, I would like to touch upon a little bit the history of gender studies in the countries where we come from, and how gender studies became part of the university study programs. And let me start in Belgrade, not because Belgrade used to be the capital of this country, but because in 1978 there was a groundbreaking and important conference taking place in Belgrade, Drugca žena, and in one of your texts, Isidora Jarić, you point out that this was a turning point. It was a start for feminist thought and also feminist movement, not only in Serbia, but also in the rest of Yugoslavia. We have quite a young audience today here, so I'm sure that not everybody remembers Drugca žena. I also don't remember it. So can you say something about why this conference is so crucial and why, and in which way it has contributed to later development of women's studies and then later gender studies in Serbia?
Yes. Someone already mentioned our common history and 1940s. in which for the first time women get certain rights, like right to vote. But in spite of the dedication of the former socialist state to the so-called women's question in 70s, appeared a new generation of women who start to rethink in a way that women's question. These were mostly higher educated women, mostly from academia, who start to self-explore their own gender experiences as women, as higher educated women, women with certain feminist ideas. Some of them attended postgraduate studies in abroad. They return to former Yugoslavia and they connect. Many of them published articles on different locations, but all that was fragmented. But in 1978 happened something which I interpret as a turning point, because these women made the connection. And two of them, Dunja Blažević, who was an art historian, and Žarana Papić, a sociologist, organized the conference Drukca, žena, žensko pitanje, novi pristup, women's question, new approach. And that was let's say conference, but not a real scientific conference. That was a meeting of women who shared similar experiences and who recognize themselves as the ones with whom they can share that and rethink and self-explore their own place within the wider self-management society. And that was the start, because after that conference in Belgrade was funded the first feminist group, Women and Society. In Zagreb was even before established other feminist group in Ljubljana as well. So they were they made the connections between themselves and they start to think what to do next.
But in terms of institutionalization of gender studies or women's studies,
well,
it took another 20 years, right, before that entered the university in
yes,
Serbia, or
if we are talking about the university, yes, but if we are talking about non-formal education, actually, even that feminist group has regular meetings every Wednesday in Student Cultural Center, because in that time the director of Student Cultural Center gave an office to this group, which that group could use every Wednesday after 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And actually, that group was functioning as a kind of conscious raising group in which women feminists were discussing about different experiences and different topics. So that was let's say, first step of non-formal education. The next step was a formalization of that non-formal education, and the next step was the activist initiative of Women's Study Center, who was created as a meeting point of activism and academia. That Women's Study Center, as a non-governmental organization, was formed in early 90s. At the beginning, it was functioning in, let's say, experimental way, because all the lecturers were in the same time the students. And all the students were considered as lecturers as well. So that was a place in which activism and activists meeting university professors and students becoming activists, and it was a really interesting concept, but as many great things in our reality, these concepts were passed through certain transformation in only a couple of years. And as a result, actually the women's studies entered or returned to the university.
And that was in the 90s?
That was the early 90s.
Branka Galić, what was the situation in Croatia? We have all followed the recent developments of how the gender studies program was eventually positively evaluated but then rejected by the ministry. I suggest we talk about that at the end, because that's part of the anti-gender mobilization, and Croatia is probably the strongest one here. But what about before? How these topics were finding place in study programs, in academia, at universities?
Maybe I will.
This mic off and that one off.
Yes, of course. I would like the first to continue on the first part of talking Isidora, because I remember years 89, 90 in state when was the last conference in Zagreb of Yugoslav feminist activists, and they came from Slovenia, from Serbia, from Bosnia. It was in 89. I remember very well because that conference was lasting for 5 days, I think, and there were many different kind of women, also activists, academics, journalists. Very interesting place, and they had. I remember because I was finishing my my last work on diploma topic, and they had some workshops, some music organizations, and they went to the camps and to Croatian islands. It was very, very intensive place. But after that, as you know, came the war, and our feminists were divided. One part of feminist groups and academics were stayed together on the same topics about women's issues general. But some of them separated on the nationalistic, I could say, nationalistic level, and they refused to have communications with the others. on that topics about important women's issues. So that was not very happy time. But in Croatia, in Zagreb, the first time was established a Croatian Center for Women's Studies as non-governmental organization in mid-90s, in 1995. And that was one place that was registered as non-governmental organization, and they were attending activists and some academics, but in formal sense they didn't have university degree of that women. They were assistants and activists and so on. But they, in that time, in 1995, I remember that they asked the dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, our Faculty of Philosophy, we call it Filozofski fakultet, but they translate it on that on English as Social Sciences and Humanities. And that dean refused to get connect with that center, and for years that center was working without academic connections. But some women from academia came as lecturers, and they were for years coming and lecturing and organizing some events. They were, for instance, making some artistic activities, promotions of books, and so on. But at the University of Zagreb, at the Faculty of Philosophy and Social Sciences and Humanities, we have many different departments. We have departments of 28 disciplines, and we have about 130 chairs and about more than 100 programs. And on all that departments, we have some courses about women and subjects connecting to women, or women and society, or languages and differences in languages, or some history programs on arts and everything. So in different years from that time, from the beginning of the 90s until now, many different teachers were attending and were introducing their new courses about that different subjects. And for example, we have at the Department of Sociology also many topics and courses. For example, Sociology of Gender from 2002, Feminist Theories from 2000, Feminist Theories and Movements from 2007. We had at our doctoral study for about 10 years until 2023. We had one big course about women and society and feminist movements, but now it is finished for some time. And also I also, for example, introduced one course at the University of Split, a course named Sociology of Women. It was the title that my colleague wanted to be exactly that title. She said, I don't want the sociology of gender, I just want sociology of women, because she had some political problems in government of university, and she wanted the women in the name and sociology in the name. I said, okay, if it will help, I will get that title. And there were many students in Split who were very interested as attending to that course, but 3 years ago, my dean at the University of Zagreb, at Faculty of Humanities, she told me, you have to stop with that activities in Split. I would not give you approval for the next year. And if you will go there without approval, I will send you to the court. And I had to stop it. I don't know until now why, but she told me that. And all that years, we have no problems in lecturing, in getting diplomas for students with our that kind of courses. But for maybe 10 years ago, some colleagues told, and we were talking about that we would like to put in a networking, some kind of networking, all that courses that we already have on our faculty, and that we can really attend to accreditate that as the program for interdisciplinary MA graduate study as gender study.
Yeah, and what happened, I suggest we continue in the second round when we will be talking about these resistances towards gender studies programs. Let's take a look at what was going on in Slovenia. So we've heard from Serbia and Croatia, slightly different history, but nevertheless these topics and these issues and first research and studying happened outside of institutions and institutional university contexts. Was that the case also in Slovenia, and how this forming a part of Yugoslavia? Because the connection, the feminist connection between Ljubljana, Zagreb and Belgrade was always there and very strong, right? And that's where the first knowledge, the feminist knowledge comes from. So how was this situation then in Slovenia in the 90s?
Yeah, the connections between feminist groups and not only the groups but also at individual level was really very strong in the 80s until the beginning of 90s, I would say. The conference that was organized in Ljubljana is very telling in its title. The meeting was titled "Good Girls Go to Heaven, Bad Girls Go to Ljubljana." This was the conference where all the feminist activists, researchers, prominent professors from Zagreb and Ljubljana met in Ljubljana and talked about these issues of inequality at that time. At that time we were using different discourse, different language. We talked about women's issues, we talked about women's studies, we talked about emancipation of women, the equality between women and men. We didn't use the word gender at that time yet. These connections were strong, but that, as my colleagues already told us, the war began at the beginning of the 90s, and all of a sudden these connections were disconnected. The only connection that was still there was anti-war, and mobilization of different women's groups around women, the organization Black Women in Black. But then there was also strong, not strong, but there were several not very big groups of women active in Ljubljana who organized the first, if I'm not wrong, first international colloquium on gender studies. It was organized by a small group of women called Ženske za politiko, so women for politics, and some other intellectuals around, and we discussed the possibilities to introduce these studies in Slovenia. There were two prominent guests from London at that time at this conference, Lee Siegel, very prominent theoretician in women's studies, and Denise Wright, who were also talking about these issues. There was also these papers was published, if I'm not wrong, in Chesapeake Critical Analysis at the time. So we were, in a way, empowered by what was going on in other parts of in Europe, and there are students already introduced in studies introduced in the curriculum at the university level. So we started to think about it. It took a lot of time. It took 6-7 years. That a small group of researchers outside of academia at that time, with the support of a few our colleagues from inside, to introduce the special program on the MA and PhD level in our faculty of Arts in 1997 with the name Ženske študije in feministične teorije, so women's studies and feminist theory, still not a gender in the title. But this was not the first program in Slovenia, the University of Ljubljana. Marca Jovan, our professor, already in the 1992 introduced the MA program, not really called neither gender nor women, but with a strong attitude towards gender equality, let's put it like this. But I would like to go a little bit more in the history, because it would not be fair to say that everything started in the 90s. Our professors were very smart. Our professors means Marca Jovan and her colleagues at that time, that introduced some courses not mentioning gender, or not mentioning feminism, or not mentioning women's studies, but with a very strong orientation to these issues. Why this was so? Because gender studies and women's studies at that time was not considered a real or serious business in the, let's say, business in the academia. So she was advised not to do that by her older colleagues. So this would mean undermine her, her position as the university professor, sociologist, real sociologist at that time. So they started to do it in a different way, to do it, what they wanted to do, but not name it as. Because this was not very supported at that time by their colleagues. Now things are changed. But anyway, so everything started in the second half of 80s, I would say, with many different courses connected to family, to politics, to work, to democracy. These kind of topics were in the air at the university level, and only, let's say, the beginning of 90s, this was, let's say, not allowed, but it was supported to name it what it is and to enter into the academy. And then on, of course, Bologna came with very many different courses. But then there was some change, not very proud.
Yeah, the latest development somehow reminds us of the beginnings, because we were talking before this roundtable how there are ideas not to call these studies anymore gender studies, but rather something else in order to not be attacked. But that's something that we can discuss at the end of the roundtable. I would like to go to North Macedonia now. Biljana, you did study in North Macedonia, although you then went to Belfast and elsewhere, and now you're placed in Italy, but you're a feminist scholar and with a socio-legal background. So to what extent, as a student in North Macedonia, you had access to feminist theory, to gender studies, what was and what is the situation in North Macedonia, and whether the main source of your knowledge rather comes from Western universities in terms of gender studies.
Yeah, well, I will probably start from the back. It definitely comes from the West. Sorry for that. So I started my studies in Macedonia at the Faculty of Law, and then once I finished my undergrad, I continued my studies but abroad. So I only had my undergrad in Macedonia, and it was at the Faculty of Law. At the time when I was starting my undergrad, there was no gender studies, there was no feminist studies, no women's studies in the formal education.
And that was when that was?
Yes, absolutely. So I started in 2001 with the law faculty, and there were no studies as part of the formal education system at that time. So in reflecting, like, for today's event, when I was thinking about like how the whole history of gender studies started, from what I know as second-hand accounts, because of course, as I said, like at the time when these developments were unfolding, I was mainly in high school, and then I moved on to the university. We can also note like this kind of like double track development, one which is part of the non-formal education and one which then followed into the formal education. And maybe I would add like a possible third path to that, which would be part of the NGOs, and where NGOs contributed to the education in relation to women and gender as a third one. So what happened in Macedonia was basically that everything started as part of the non-formal education and as part of the efforts to actually start gender research, to start translating books in relation to feminism and gender, and to start teaching also in the informal setting as part of a what was officially a non-governmental organization at the time, which was called Euro-Balkan Institute, which then later, once the law allowed, transformed itself into an educational institution, but it started in the 90s, in the mid-90s, as basically an NGO. Within this institute, the Euro-Balkan Institute, Professor Katarina Kolozova, who we can like easily say is probably the biggest driver behind gender studies in the country, established the Center for Gender Research. And basically, this is the first place where you can say, like, in some organized, structured way, research and study most akin to the academic one. She's a philosopher, and so a lot of the people gravitating around the center were either in philosophy, sociology, psychology. Law was nowhere on the map at the time. We only had, and still have, only one book, which is on feminism, and it's also not on law, basically. It's just written by a law professor on feminist theories and political systems. So for me, my first encounter with feminist methodologies and with studies and with critical understanding of things came only when I started my first master's, which was in Sarajevo at the Democracy and Human Rights Program, which is the Sarajevo-Bologna double program, where I was lucky enough to have lecturers and teachers who forwarded to us not only the feminist perspective, but also brought in for us the option to actually use feminist methodologies in our research to understand what that means and how it can help develop our own topics and our own research, which for me at that point was mind-blowing, because in the 4 years that I stayed at the law faculty in Skopje, there was not a single course which had a full lesson on feminism or on gender or on women. So there was a part in the course on the methodology, which I still remember. It was like a subsection of a book, which basically mentioned the existence of feminist methodologies, but that was it, speaking within the formal sense. But like, in order like to tie my input to the session, like to what the other panelists were speaking, I could share also that like how it actually entered into the formal higher education system. So within, at the beginning of the 2000s, specifically 2002 and 2003, in that academic year, professors at the faculty of basically the faculty of philosophy, so persons that were teaching the humanities, they started with the initiative to introduce gender studies. And they were, according to their accounts that I have read, they were basically inspired by the ongoing higher educational reforms. So there was already a larger, vaster process of higher education reforming, and they thought that this is a good window to get, like that this is like the train that they should get on if they want to introduce gender studies. So that's what they did. They started with the initiative officially, and the whole process took them about 5 years from the idea until the opening of the first call, and officially the first gender studies opened their doors in 2008. Now that might seem quite late compared to the other countries as we are speaking, but please mind the context. Macedonia had started its higher education development very late, only during socialism, so in 1950s is when the first university was open. And also the feminist movement in Macedonia was not as developed as the one in Croatia, Slovenia, and in Serbia. So for example, if I'm not mistaken, there was not a single participant at the Drukca conference from Macedonia, which is also telling for where the movement was. It was very much pinged onto this part of the AFG and following structures, and it was really focused on that. And even in the beginning of the 19th, that is how the country entered into the whole story. And that is why I mentioned that third track of the NGOs and how that also fed into the development and the encouragement of gender studies. So that is why that track is so important. So we had that track, we had the NGO track, which was later formalized as gender studies, so the Katarina Kolozova Institute, which is still functioning today. And then we had the formal one, which first opened doors in 2008, and which then had a very turbulent history, but I think that we will talk about that later on.
Yeah. Nina, you studied in Slovenia, obviously, and you entered university when this history, which we are talking about now, has already played out in a sense that gender studies or women's studies were already part of the official curricula. So how was it for you to, as a student and now a professor, to experience, to have this knowledge, available, to have this topic discussed? What I want to ask you is the perspective from the other side. So we've heard the struggles of how these topics can be, and it's hard to push them into the classrooms, but what was the reaction on the other side? How did you see this? Also maybe later when you were reflecting on, now that you know the history of the feminist movement.
Well, you asking about my student experiences makes me feel very young.
That was my point, I just didn't want to say it.
So I was studying sociology around, I started to study sociology around 2010, I think. So this is the time frame, Milica is smiling. This is the time frame we are talking about. Now, I don't remember entering the Faculty of Social Sciences as a, some kind of a ready-made subject with sociological imagination, especially when it comes to gender, and gender is an approach which would be friendly and comparable with gender studies. Yeah? But I did enter the faculty as a young lesbian, let's say, trying to find the place in very heteronormative and very gender normative world. And in this sense, meeting with these topics was in a way life-changing, and in certain aspects probably also life-saving. So I've studied sociology, so I probably first encountered Medicamenzin, for example, which is social and political psychology, and meeting in third year, I think, a course which carried the gender studies or sociology of gender in its title in the third year, but up to that point, the work has already been done by all the smuggling that has already been implemented through different foundational courses or courses that were specific to the study program of sociology. So this was my experience in sociology, but to be fair, and there is a twist, I was also a student of Faculty of Education, where very much similar process has happened, encountering sociology of education, and I'm looking in that direction because the person responsible is sitting over there, and later gender and education course. So you meet with these topics and these approaches here and there. I would say the courses which would explicitly focus on gender and feminist issues and gender and women's studies as such are today perhaps rare. At sociology we only have one course at BA level which carries sociology of gender in its title, but the topics are always there, mostly because of all the smuggling that is being implemented. So I think that was my experience, somehow giving me the tools in a way to deconstruct in a very friendly and gentle manner the world that was in its essence violent to me personally and in general, the world that was generating a lot of suffering, let's say.
Well, it is telling that we are talking about smuggling and life-saving in the same sentence, more or less, when talking about these issues. On the side note, I'm just listening to all of you, it's interesting also how differently we translate Filozofske fakultete. Because the Faculty of Arts is the official translation here. But that's for another roundtable. Isidora, Branka and Milica, you've been teaching gender courses for a while. Can you just very briefly reflect on how your approach has changed in these years of teaching in terms of what you discuss, what you talk about, what are the questions that you receive in the class from students? So just a very brief overview of, in terms of the content, right? What has changed? And maybe you can also explain to us, we are now constantly jumping from women's studies to gender studies. What is the difference, or how come that we started with women's studies and we are now at gender studies and not also always and everywhere and so forth? A lot of questions in one question, but Isidora, maybe we can start with you.
Yes. Actually, I can compare my experience as a student, which was many years ago, because I was the first generation of students on the Department of Sociology who get opportunity to take that electoral course of women's studies on the Faculty of Philosophy. And I have to say that all of us were female students. So today, when I am teaching, I have half and half. I have as many male students as female. And in the time when I was attending that course, that was a course of women's studies. And that is very connected to this first phase about which I was talking about, which is a kind of self-exploration phase, a phase of reconceptualization of our ideas, who we are. But now, I would say that male students also feel that they need to rethink about themselves, because the oppression to which they are exposed is equally strong to the oppression to which female students are exposed. I mean, I have a 24-year-old son, and I know how much time he's spending in front of the mirror. how it is important does T-shirt has, I don't know, we or O. So I read that as a kind of social oppression to which he is exposed. And I see that also when I'm teaching about different topics. I see on which topics students react. They react very much, and I was testing that in Branka's class in Zagreb as well. I start maybe 10 years ago to teach about the beauty myth, you know, the book and the story. And first, the students were not reacting. Now they are reacting. That's the most intensive class, because they are all on social networks, and they recognize that that's the story about the image. So they are reacting very much on that. So the things are changing, and they are changing in accordance with these phases through which we are passing in conceptualization of gender studies, in a way.
Just very briefly, in 2 sentences, you mentioned before, and I think it's an interesting piece of information, that you have now an agreement at your Department of Sociology that issues about gender and feminist theory are part of every course where it fits.
Yes,
How did you manage to make this
was even
agreement?
2010. In 2010, we as department get offer of the state publisher, Zavod za udžbenike, to create a textbook for sociology for high school. And we, 20 of us, we were participating in that book. And our common agreement was that topic of gender and topic of youth intersect all the units in the textbook. So we made that kind of agreement to the department even before related to our curricula.
Branka, what has changed since you started and now? And if I can add additional question, because we don't have enough already. You mentioned that you lectured in Zagreb and Split, and remembering the harsh homophobic attacks on pride parades in Split. I'm just wondering, is it a different experience? Are there different questions asked in Split than in Zagreb?
Yes, in a way, but not totally. Sorry. When I started in Zagreb, I was much younger, and it was with the course Sociology of Gender in 2002. I remember that I sent my program of the course to the faculty council. And faculty council, in the first place, they were reading that and said, we don't know much about it. Could you please explain it much broader and give some examples for other faculties and universities in the world? And I was Googling and found many universities, of course, and put all of them in footnotes. And after that, they understood that we are actually on the end of the line of the whole system, and they accepted. But in the first place, it was all the time, from the beginning and until now, it is an elected course. And every year, I have so many interest for the course that I have to refuse, unfortunately, some students. Some of them are coming from other faculties. I have a little quota, about 5, for other faculties. For example, they are coming from of course from a faculty of political sciences, but sometimes they are coming from other disciplines, for example, pharmacy faculty, or for example, constructions faculty. It's or this year I had one girl from music academy, and interesting, different kinds. But I also noticed that in the beginning there were much more women, maybe some men, and sometimes that men were coming with prejudges, and they were interrupting sometimes lecturing, and they had some objections and everything, but until the end of the semester, sometimes they changed their attitudes, and I was very satisfied with that. Also, my students are very active in seminars. They are working and presenting some topics, some research, little researches and everything, but they are sometimes struggling between them in the seminars, and they are not always, they don't have always the same attitudes, they have different attitudes, and I'm allowed to them to quarrel. Why not? But of course, during that time of the seminar. But my experience in Split was different in a kind that there are two kinds of the attitudes of that students. Some of them are very patriarchal, and the other, are very radical and left. And they are nothing in between. They are so different. Because there is a background near Split, some small villages, some small towns in Dalmatia, we call it Dalmatinska Zagora, and they have really very patriarchal kind of everyday lives. Still, for example, they said to me that if a girl has not get married with 18 or 20 years old, that they think about her that she is old woman. Old. I was very, I didn't know what to say on that kind of behavior. But in Zagreb is not that situation. And also in Zagreb, I want to teach a new actual situations, because we have very different approach to that women's rights and especially reproductive rights in our society. And we have, maybe you know, every Saturday, the first Saturday in month, I think a year and a half, they are already coming. A group of men who are attending to the main squares of the towns, in the whole Croatia, and they say for them that they are praying for peace and for some other things, and also they are praying that women come back to home, to stop working, and to listen their husbands at home and working what they say to them, and also to stop abortions and to put that kind of law under the without a legal approach. So
Yeah.
that kind of actual things in Croatia are really very, very hard, and they are changing some political issues also. And students are very interested in that.
And are also
Yes.
topics of research and discussion. Milica, what about your reflections on being a feminist teacher at the Faculty of Arts, also known as Social Sciences and Humanities in Croatia?
Faculty of Philosophy,
Faculty of Philosophy in Serbia.
the only one.
Yes.
I think my history is quite different because I was not that young when I started to teach here. Actually, I started to teach at Central European University before I started to teach here, which was a very interesting development in my professional career. And I'd like to say that very many professors from Zagreb and Belgrade at that time was my colleague at Central European University because it was difficult to introduce.
I completed my MPhil on Central European University.
So we missed to meet in Budapest. So there were professors from Zagreb, Belgrade, Ljubljana that we were invited to teach in Central European University, and we were of course happy because here these studies were not like that at the university level. But when I started to teach here after some unexpected and unusual developments at my department, and I was very surprised that I was invited to teach at my faculty now by Professor Saksida, who was how to put it, he was very exceptional professor at that time, and he introduced open lectures at Department of Sociology, in which different persons from outside academia lectured in different topics. At that time I was exploring women in politics, and he invited me to talk about that, and after that he invited me to have electing lecture course at the Department of Sociology. And only in 1998 I started to teach, at that time also electing course and titled, what was the title? I think it was Introduction to Sociology of Gender, something like that. The first courses were, for me, very inspiring because there was a lot of students. For you who are from here, this was the room 15 at the basement, and the room was full. It's not full, for example, in the last years, because this was the only course in which we can teach about gender at that time. And I remember that after some of the lectures, a student, a woman, came to me and said to me that she brought her boyfriend to listen to the course as well, and I was so happy about that. But this was really really pioneering years, because there were not a lot of chances to hear about these issues. And of course there was not a lot of translated books or articles about gender. And when I started to make a syllabus, I was scared what to put in it, because all of the books and articles were in English or in different other languages. Now it's completely different. Now we have a lot of our publication and also a lot of translated publications on gender. So the situation completely changed, I think, in the last 10 years after Bologna process, because very many different courses started. Students had chances to go to different elective courses. Also, the knowledge explored elsewhere in the civil society, in different groups, in different, I would say, different cultural production, of course. I mean, performances in the arts. This topic is the one which came into the mainstream, I would like to say. So the situation came, but what is the, and I wanted to also stress is that free, if I'm not wrong, my PhD students already teach gender studies at this faculty or other faculties. So it's, you know, it's here, and it's completely different situation for me and for students.
But while we thought that the only way is up when it comes to gender studies, we are now faced with intensive resistances, which were always there, but now they seem to be much more organized and strong and global. It's not a local phenomena. Biljana, you mentioned briefly before that the gender studies program was introduced in 2008, but that they faced quite a lot of issues. North Macedonia is, of course, not an exception when it comes to anti-gender craziness, but the resistances that you were talking about are probably dating prior to these latest developments. Can you just briefly describe what was going on?
Yep. So, as mentioned, the Gender Studies program opened at the Faculty of Philosophy in 2008, and then that was exactly at the same time when the nationalistic government of Gruevski started to kind of shape its nationalistic agenda, and which was basically the track that the country was on in the next 10 years. And that track included a lot of anti-gender activities, part of the anti-gender, anti-feminist, and a lot of focus on the family, focused on childbirth. What was the word for that? The word escapes me now. Population policy. Pronatal. Thank you. Yeah, the pronatal policies. So this is like what that government really placed to focus on. And as part of the focus of these activities, aside from mass campaigns for giving birth to a third or fourth child, huge financial incentives and so on, then also amending and downgrading basically the protection of the right to abortion. As part of this whole scope of activities, one part was the so-called freezing of the gender studies, which effectively meant that no new students can be registered at the program. And this lasted for about 5 years. It started, I think, 2012 or 2013, and then it lasted for five or 6 years. During that time, the excuse for freezing the studies officially that was provided, although kind of officially, kind of unofficially, that was provided was basically that there have been a lot of graduates, but that there are not that many jobs for these people, which didn't hold water because basically it was very few people who had graduated from the program. And a lot of them also had not just very good jobs, but also they became very prominent in the public, very public speakers when it comes to gender equality. And some of them are even today one of the most vocal feminists and most vocal gender analysts and so on. So we are talking about really a very good quality production of people who could fill the void when it comes to gender analysis, gender studies, gender research, and so on, which was, I didn't mention that in the first part, but probably the biggest selling point of how the university managed to push this issue through with very little resistance was that Macedonia at the time signed the Stabilization and Association Agreement with the European Union. So the Faculty of Philosophy basically argued that because we are on this path to European Union accession, we need more experts when it comes to gender equality, and we need to make them here at the oldest and the biggest state university. So that was their biggest selling point. How we came from that to 2012, 2013, where we were still in the European Union process, needing more expertise than ever, regarding gender equality to close the program, which, as I said, basically had produced only few people. I think 20 people graduated by that point, all of them very well engaged in society. So basically the justification didn't hold. But the whole picture became very clear when that center was basically replaced with a center on family studies. So the professors were shifted from the gender program to a family studies program, and then this family studies program remained in place while the gender program remained officially frozen but effectively non-existing. So that's what happened, and then it was only after the Gruevski rule ended and the government changed that the university, in connection with the Ministry of Education and Science, adopted the decision to restart basically the gender studies program, to unfreeze it in a way. And that's when students started to sign up again. During this whole time, there was a lot of resistance to it from civil society. There were letters and initiatives being signed by alumni. But the thing was that the government just simply didn't care. At that point, they were very strong. They were dominating every sphere of society. And it was basically nothing that we could do possibly to change their decision, because as said, this was just one part of a grand overall scheme of eroding women's rights and eroding gender equality in the country. Yeah, so we kind of had like Orban before it was cool, but like it's now kind of going into circles. So I think that we will be arriving at that point soon again, because like we've had this Demo-Christian government in power now who is very happy to be received by Trump and to be received by Orban, and is like wholeheartedly accepting all of these executive decisions and so on. So I think we're on a downward spiral again. So like the circle, it just keeps going on.
This is exactly what I wanted to comment. I didn't even know you had Orban before it was popular. But the same arguments were put forward by the Orban's government, that there is not enough workplace, or that these kind of graduates are not needed in Hungary, and that it is not in line with the Christian culture.
That as well. No, but I just wanted to add, like, our former Prime Minister, so Gruevski, is a very good friend of Orban, kind of like unofficially advising him, so.
Branka, the latest developments we were all following in Croatia, because there were reports also beyond Croatia, of course. Can you explain briefly what happened with this gender study program, which eventually through the whole long procedure of accreditation, but at the last point it was declined?
Yes. We went to that process of accreditation together with other our departments, with other disciplines from the whole faculty, because the whole faculty went to new accreditation process in 2023. But some departments, some disciplines went, for example, 30% change, some went 50%, some went 80%, maybe some went 100%. For example, we at our sociology department went about 80%. That was almost a totally new program. But we also looked at that situation as a possibility to apply a new gender study program as a whole. We planned that it would be graduate interdisciplinary MA study. And we put it on the same address, on the same institution as the others. That was our university, University of Zagreb. We sent it at April 2023 and waited what happened. Nobody sent us any kind of answer until July of 2024, and they said that we missed the dress. That was the answer of our Ministry for Science and Education. But it is very interesting that it was only one day after our bishop conference at Croatian TV announced to the whole public that gender study is a gender ideology and it couldn't be accepted as a new study in Croatia. After that, only one day after, we received that explanation that we missed the dress. And that we have to go to other new institution who is deciding about new initial programs, and that is Agency for Science and Education. They established a new agency for science and education for attending new programs, and we have to go there. Besides that, we had also other 7 new programs at our faculty that they were attending also to University of Zagreb, and they were accepted. They were not misaddressed.
So what is the situation now? Did you go to the new agency? Are you still trying to develop that? Or?
I could say, I think that our colleagues, some of them, are afraid now, especially younger colleagues, because they are in the process of getting maybe a higher degree in employment structure. And I tried about 3 times to get a new meeting about that. Last time we had a meeting in September 2024, and on that meeting came about half of colleagues. I think in total we are about 30 colleagues, and on that meeting came maybe 15. And came also our dean, vice dean, for study programs, one woman who came from maybe 10 years ago. She came from Catholic faculty. She is a theologist, and she came to our faculty to study Croatian language and literature. She finished that, and in a few years she became vice dean. And she came to that meeting and said, maybe now is not so good political situation, maybe it would be better that we try to apply with other kind of program that we call the whole life program. The whole life program is something totally different. That is not, it is not any kind of university program with diploma and MA graduate paper. I was very angry in that moment and asked her, so did you suggest that we don't apply new program and to new institution? And she said, I don't know, and what would be the best? We can organize the second meeting and we can decide. Some colleagues said, no, we want to get to new accreditation process for this, what we wanted to make. And there were some rumors that in these political situations that we have now in Croatia, we have in governing party 2 parties. One is Croatian Democratic Party. You know it for a very long time, many years. That is some, so we can say maybe shallow right party. But we have got last year a new party together with the Croatian Democratic Party. They call themselves Homeland Movement. They are far right party. And they also, in that time when Croatian Bishop Conference announced that on TV program, they also came to different media and also told about that our program is ideology, it is not acceptable for the university and so on. So I think now it's some kind of intermezzo. We are waiting for the next meeting for almost 6 months, and nothing is moving about that.
But what you're saying is quite familiar because these kind of stories come from different places. Isidora, in Serbia, just recently you had debate on gender-sensitive language and gender equality law, which, if I'm not mistaken, was then rejected or pronounced unconstitutional or something like that. So I'm wondering, in this kind of context, what is the situation with gender studies at your university? Do you feel this anti-gender mobilization which is taking place in Serbia or not yet at the university?
For sure, but I would like to emphasize. I would like to emphasize that on one side we have that outsider enemies. These pro-right actors who are trying to put into the question, do we need gender studies? But we should not forget that gender studies are very tightly connected to the movement. They are a child of feminist movement. And within the feminist movement, globally, we have very, let's say, not so nice shifts. I would just remind you on a relatively recent declaration against trans persons, which is, from my point of view, something which is fundamentally anti-feminist. I mean, if you want to insist that the person, whoever is that person, cannot shape his or her own identity according to his or her internal desires, then that is totally anti-feminist. I believe that this situation in which gender studies are globally is a synergy of that outside and inside factors. And now we have to find a way how to deal with these structures. Yeah.
Nina, what about Slovenia? You're following and researching these latest developments. Would you say that gender studies at the university are one of the main targets of the anti-gender mobilization, or it is not yet so much exposed as it is, as for example in Macedonia or Croatia?
Yeah, I think they are one of the main targets, gender studies or women's studies, feminist theories, and so on, the usual suspects, so to speak. And I think with the reasons why, I think are fairly straightforward. I was thinking about Wallerstein and the role he assigns to social sciences. And according to him, and I think it fits with what gender studies are trying to do very nicely, that's why I'm making this detour. He says that social sciences, emancipatory social sciences, are responsible mainly for producing alternative visions of the world as it could be, and are at the same time responsible for legitimizing this very vision. Now, by going after gender studies and the things we are doing in our field, you're taking both things away. First, the image of, concrete vision of an alternative way that gender order or gendered world could be. And secondly, you're taking away the legitimacy by making these very images, practices seem plausible and justified. So you're taking this away because through anti-gender mobilizations, gender studies are portrayed as ideological rather than scientific. And in this way, I think gender studies in Slovenia in particular, but also wider, are exposed to breaches in autonomy, not by some formal way which would be tangible and thus somehow easier to resist, but in this very softer way by exposing gender studies scholars or institutions we are all working at to this kind of very public attacks. So I think it's a very dangerous trend which needs to be approached and thought about in broader picture as well, not only as something which is happening to gender studies in particular, but also emancipatory social sciences in general, think critical race theory, for example. But also we do tend to approach this manner predominantly from the perspective as something which is happening to us, to the academic field. Homo academicus is resistant to objectify itself. So in this sense, I also think it is important to ask ourselves whether we ourselves, by allowing the academic field to buy so easily and widely into this quantifying logic of doing science, have at the end somehow made the field itself so vulnerable to these attacks. So I think both things need to be looked at. First, what is happening outside, but also what is happening in the inside of the academic field itself, which could make us more vulnerable to these attacks as it could be.
A few years ago, Zygmunt Bauman was here at the Faculty of Arts. We were, I think, celebrating 50th anniversary of the Department of Sociology. And in his speech, his lecture, he said that the role of social sciences in 21st century, and your answer reminded me of his lecture, he said that the role is to make unfamiliar things familiar, which makes sense, but also to make familiar unfamiliar. And I think gender studies are making something that looks familiar unfamiliar, and that's where these attacks are coming in. We only have a few more minutes, and I haven't asked you yet the question which is in the title of this roundtable, and that is the future of gender studies. So I would like to finish with that, but please in 1 or 2 sentences, because I can already smell the coffee from outside. Milica, can we start with you?
Can we start with somebody else?
Or Branka, we start with you.
I think that we must continue with the work. I think we must continue, but we can arrange some kind of camouflage, as I can say it. Maybe some new type of terminology or some new kind of presenting that subjects in public media in the first place, because media are always going around and asking something, and we can arrange it in our use, but for the public good. A little bit camouflage, nothing special. Maybe some kind of new terminology, so-called.
Well, I don't believe that the future of gender studies is jeopardized, in spite of all things which we share. Because I believe that there is a community which working on certain topics, and that community will produce an upgrade, like the community which made the move from women's studies to gender studies. So our common future is to work on these issues, and then our work will lead us to the next phase.
Where does one get this optimism? Okay, Biljana.
Well, I tend to think that things are cyclical when it comes to this. So I think that, I like to hope that, although now we are kind of in a downward spiral, that we will again rise from all of this. And I hope that we will rise stronger. But it does remain for me to be seen who will jump on this anti-gender wagon now, because it seems that people have all too easily been turning allegiances over to that side now, from sides which we need as our alliance, as our allies in this whole struggle. But a bigger issue that I also see is the whole context of neoliberalism within higher education, which might change the entire higher education landscape, coupled together with the advancement of technology and artificial intelligence, which of course will reshape the way that we see and experience formal education. And I think that gender studies has like a double challenge, which is to both survive, barely to survive within this whole context, to try to thrive as much as we can and deal with our own challenges, such as intersectionality, like the acceptance and the cleavages, which Isidora mentioned, especially when it comes to trans persons, but the entire polarization really. And then on the other side, to adjust to this whole new context in which we are realistically living. So,
Thank you.
Not optimism, but realism. I remember when Adorno was asked, when he studied the new aspect of right-wing extremism, he was asked what are his predictions on the future of this right-wing extremism in the 60s, so after the Second World War, and his answer was very simple in a way. The future is what we will make out of it. Now I remember Professor Jogan, I think, stated somewhere that smuggling gender studies into institutions was a very lonely. But she said it, right? You were quoting her in the interview, no? Okay.
So said the author is dead. So
Milica's not, Roman. So it was a very lonely undertaking, yeah? But it's not anymore. So I would add to Adorno's bet on the future. The future is what we will collectively make out of it.
Milica, what will we make of it?
No, I'm a bit confused now, but anyway. I wanted to be at the end because I thought you would be more pessimistic and that we need an optimistic ending, but you surprised me very well. Thank you for that. But I wanted to stress this, that when I was researching what was going on at the beginning of the start of introducing gender studies into the academia, we were witnessed with the pressure inside academia. Our, male professors was quite against it. Now we are witnessing the pressure outside of academia, mostly from the right-wing politicians and politics from the different parts of the world. But I think that now we are stronger at the university. We are equipped with the theoretical knowledge. We didn't have the opportunity before to do that. We are equipped with the empirical knowledge as well, because we are doing very many researches, what is going on in our societies. So, and the field developed in a different way, in different field of knowledge. So I think we will not only survive, but we will improve in academia in the future.
Okay, thank you very much. I know that I was very unkind because I didn't open up the space for your questions, but I did it deliberately because I do invite you now to stay here and you have a chance to ask our guests your question, but drink coffee at the same time, which is also important. So at the end, I would just like to thank Isidora Jarić, Branka Galić, Biljana Kotevska, Perger, and Milica Antić Gaber. Thank you so much for sharing your views and thoughts, and thank you for the optimism at the end. And thanks for coming to the University of Ljubljani Faculty of Art. And I guess we can say that this year's Days of Equality of Genders is now officially opened.
And I would like to thank Roman for guiding us to this debate today, and to you who are listening to us. And yes, you are invited for a coffee. Thank you very much.
Thank you.